He is a wonderful African-American man. Both of my sons are married to lovely young women. One is Filipino and the other is Hispanic. My oldest daughter is married to a handsome young Irishman. And my youngest daughter is still single. Most of my grandchildren had at least one grandparent whose English is not their first language. But they all have a strong sense of self and identity. They know who they are and where they come from. I have a beautiful international family. I grew up in California in the 1960s and 70s. When I was in the second grade, my dad moved out, and by the third grade, my parents divorced. This was not unlike a lot of kids, but growing up, I always felt like there was something wrong with me, like I didn't fit in. And I was treated different by many family members. It would be years until I learned why.
What are you is a question I would be asked frequently. And a lot of people would ask if my sister and I had the same parents. Growing up, I believed I knew my genetic makeup, but I didn't. So I'd rattle off a list of the countries I was told I was from, and assure those that asked that yes, my sister and I have the same parents. Who are you and where you come from, I believe, is important. But what if the answers to those questions you thought were wrong? Does that change things? Skip forward to when I was raising my children. For the most part, they all had a stable upbringing. Unlike me, they didn't move every year. They didn't attend 15 different schools. Instead, they went to the same elementary, junior high, and high school. Unlike me, they didn't live in 9 different cities, but they grew up in the same community. I didn't have a stable upbringing or home life. All the moving around to different schools affected my academics, and always being new kid at school meant that I was often bullied. But this is what made me who I am. Being bullied made me a more compassionate person. And moving around to different schools with kids of different races made me more open to people of different cultures and backgrounds. And having an unstable home life taught me the appreciation of family. In all of us, there is a hunger, marrow deep, to know our heritage, to know who we are and where we come from. Without this enriching knowledge, there is a hollow yearning. No matter what we attain in life, there is a vacuum, an emptiness, and a most disquieting loneliness. Many of you are too young to remember this, but when I was coming of age, Alex Haley wrote a book that was turned into a television miniseries called Roots. This truly transfixed a nation less than a generation removed from the civil rights era to face the ugly history of slavery and consequently everything that led up to the civil rights movement of the 1960s. I wouldn't learn the importance of this for many years. When I was 29 years old, my whole world changed. My mother decided to tell me a secret, one that her mother told her to take to her grave. She told me that my dad may not be my dad. She just was not sure. To this day, I can only imagine how difficult it was for her to tell me the truth, but I am so glad she did. Even though it was a secret, somehow deep down inside I knew. And on that day, that little voice that had told me there's something wrong with you 1,000 times, that voice was silent. I knew without a shadow of a doubt that there was nothing wrong with me, that I was the black sheep of the family, not because of a flaw, but because of my mother's indiscretion and shame. It would be many years before I could confirm this. But on my daughter's high school graduation, my dad and I took a DNA test. And the only man that I'd ever known as my dad was not. I didn't know if I was sad or relieved. But now there was a tugging on my soul to find out what the other half of me was. Over the years, I looked for my biological father. But all I had was a very common first and last name, and a state that he might possibly be from. After about 10 years, I'd given up looking for him, but I had envisioned in my mind of this man that might exist. I thought, maybe he was Jewish. My mother was Jewish. And if he knew about my existence, maybe he was looking for me too. There's a company called 23andMe. They do autosomal DNA testing, and they can tell you all the different parts of the world your ancestors are from, and they can connect you to close and distant relatives. So I took another DNA test. And when the results came in, I clicked on my ancestry composition, and then I clicked on DNA relatives. And right underneath my profile picture was a picture of a man. It told me that 50% of my DNA matched with his, that William Miller was my father, the same name my mother had told me about 20 years previously. I was shocked. I was not expecting this. I messaged him. He replied with his phone number. We talked on the phone. He cried off and on and seemed so happy. The next thing I know, I was on a plane to meet him. I spent almost 5 days with him. And during that visit, a lot of my questions would be answered. But I returned with many more. And some of those questions I don't think any of us have the answers to. But one is central to us all. And that is, what makes us who we are? Is it biology? We all carry the DNA of our ancestors and our parents. There is a biological legacy that contributes to who we are and what we look like. But how much? What about our free will? How much of what we really are is what we choose to be? Bill is a complicated man. He is intelligent, thoughtful, and hardworking. He is a part of my family history. But there are things about him, my grandfather, and other family members that are frankly horrifying. Here's a picture of my grandfather, a high-ranking member of the KKK, being arrested for trying to bomb an all-black college in Arkansas. When I went searching for a history and a connection to my past, I did not know I was going to find this. But during my visit with Bill, I would learn some of this history and some of his. My father lives alone. He never married or had any other children. There was very few people that he said anything nice about. He seemed bitter, sad, and very lonely. He also has a brother that lives alone that never had any children. My father is a product of his upbringing. When he talks about people, he labels them by race. It was very hurtful to hear him speak of people as blacks, Jews, Anglos, or Mexicans, instead of just people. He told me that black people had ruined the place of his birth, Memphis, Tennessee, and that things would be better back the way they were during segregation, and that he preferred white people. All of this talk made me sick. I thought, how would he describe my family, my husband, my children, his grandchildren? The real bombshell came late one night during our visit. And that is when he first told me about my grandfather, who was a racial terrorist responsible for transporting dynamite from state to state and planting it under the stairs in various different buildings. He also helped organize the harassment of a small group of black students integrating into an all-white high school in Arkansas. My grandfather was a grand wizard in the KKK, opening up new chapters in his state, and he bragged about the fun that he would have on the weekends when he would take his German Shepherd out to terrorize African Americans in his community. I was horrified beyond belief. There are no words to describe the gut-wrenching anguish I felt as my father's words reverberated in my head. Was this my family? My legacy? The easy thing for me to do would be to walk away and shut the door to this part of my life. But I did not. This is my husband, my soulmate. His mother is one of the most incredible women I have ever met. Both of her parents were murdered years apart by Southern racists. His father was chased out of town at gunpoint by the Klan for teaching black students math so that they could properly calculate their earnings while working for the men in charge. How would he and my children feel knowing that my grandfather's goals were to murder people because they were black, and that my biological father still harbored some of those hateful prejudices that were passed down to him? This made it very difficult for me to try and make a connection with my father. is the word emet. It's also a name. In Hebrew, it means truth. Did I mention that I'm Jewish from my mother? I'm telling you this because weeks before I connected with my biological father, my family had a circumcision ceremony for my grandson, and I had to pick a Hebrew name for my son because I had not done so when he was a baby. And I chose the name Emmett. The rabbi said that even though I was just choosing his name that day, it's as if I had always known it, like it had been whispered to me by God. Weeks after that ceremony, when I made the connection with my biological father, I learned that my grandfather's name was Emmett. The truth can be painful. The truth can be uncomfortable. And sometimes you could wish that it was not true. But sometimes the truth can set people free from lies they have believed about themselves for years. I choose to engage in a relationship with my biological father, to come to terms with who he is and who my grandfather was, in part because I'd like to change that legacy. It's my way of refuting a legacy of hate to say it did not work. I could also say that while my grandfather was terrorizing people and spreading hate, that I was a small child in California growing up, surrounded by all kinds of wonderful nationalities, learning the value of all human beings. My mixed-race children and my grandchildren are a part of his legacy, whether he would have liked it or not. Everything he fought so hard to prevent was allowed to grow and thrive. When my father passes away, there will be no one to carry on my grandfather's name. No one in his family poisoned by ignorance and hate to continue his efforts. My family is the antithesis of everything that he was. My father and my grandfather are my past. My children and my grandchildren are my future. And maybe, just maybe, my story is a small version of the American story. Look at our history honestly. Look at the good and the bad. How often have we as people tried to hide the hard truths of what our ancestors have done? And knowing that, and even facing the kind of racism that we see today, and facing that, is the only way to change that legacy. This is my story. It is still ongoing, and it has not been easy. Maybe it will end as a story of redemption and forgiveness between a father and a daughter. The verdict is still out on that. But the story that I wanted to tell is the story of my truth. And that's one of love, not hate, peace, not terror, and how loving your neighbor as yourself can change a family, a community, and possibly even the world. Thank you.